Welcome, everyone. This is the second session of the Virtual Clean Fuels Summit for 2022. Thank you all for joining us here today. And first, before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. So we have our corporate sponsors, which are Entergy and AmeriGas, both of which are supporting members of Louisiana Clean Fuels. We thank you all for your support. And for FuelsFix, fuelsfix.com, they are a really fantastic online news outlet, and they have great articles about practical tips and clean fuels projects from clean cities coalitions all over the country. It's a really informative magazine, and I encourage you all to check it out. So as the second session of our virtual Clean Fuels Summit, I want to remind you that this is hosted by both Louisiana Clean Fuels and the Southeast Louisiana Clean Fuel Partnership. That is both of your Clean Cities coalitions for the state of Louisiana. And today we are here with our state agency leadership panel talking about our clean transportation visions and goals for each of these state departments. And let's get right to it. So the department members that we are going to be talking to today are Tom Harris, Secretary of Department of Natural Resources, Dr. Sean Wilson, who is Secretary of the Department of Transportation and Development, and Dr. Chuck Brown, Secretary of the Department of Environmental Quality. But before we get started, if you've been to one of our webinars before, you're going to hear this again. We want to tell you about Clean Cities and what we do and why we do this. So the Clean Cities Coalition Network, this is really just a great slogan. The building partnerships to advance affordable domestic transportation, fuel, and technologies. That's what we are. So we are a coalition as a group of people working together for a common cause. And these coalitions are your grassroots organizations across the country that work hand in hand with public and private fleets to help them find solutions to solve their problems. So we're not going to come in touting a specific technology or a specific fuel and trying to force it in, to every situation. We're going to be looking at what your goals are, what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, what kind of vehicles you have, your use cases, your duty cycles, and we're going to help make recommendations that work for you. And as this grassroots organization, we really know what's going on the ground, and we can connect you with the right people in the areas and help you move your projects forward. And what is Clean Cities? So Clean Cities was started by the Department of Energy, and we fit in with the Department of Energy under the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Division. And in that division, there is a Vehicle Technologies Office. And the Vehicle Technologies Office helps to advance transportation technologies through these different areas, batteries and electrification, materials technologies, energy efficient mobility systems, which is looking at transportation as a whole, not just the individual parts like the individual cars or chargers or fuels. This is how all the things, when they interact together, how do they affect overall emissions and sustainability and efficiency. And they're also a division that does some really great research on advanced engine and fuels. And that's where we fit in, is nestled in with all of these, because we're the ones that help bring these solutions out into the community and to the fleets. And our portfolio, so lately you've been hearing a lot about electric vehicles. We're not just about electric vehicles, whereas 5 years ago, organizations were asking us if we were a natural gas nonprofit. It's just sometimes there's new things that come out, there's lots of funding and there's a lot of interest, but we're here to help you with all of them. So light, medium, heavy duty vehicles, all the alternative fuels, as long as it's an EPAC mandated fuel and it's domestic. Idle reduction measures, fuel economy improvements. If you saw our session earlier today, Tyler was talking about just how efficient these types of measures are at reducing emissions and with fuel savings. And they're just so easy to implement. So that's another great option. And then new built mobility choices and emerging transportation technologies. So Clean Cities coalitions are all over the country. There are more than 75 active coalitions, and in Louisiana, you have 2 Clean Cities coalitions, your hosts of the Clean Fuel Summit. There's us, Louisiana Clean Fuels, and the Southeast Louisiana Clean Fuel Partnership, which covers the New Orleans Planning Commission area. So their territory is the same territory as their Clean Cities Coalition. And if there isn't a Clean Cities Coalition where you live, just look right next door and find one that's close to you. Any of us will be willing to help. And so what do we actually do? Well, we're the ones that are helping to connect fleets and fuel providers and industry partners. We're kind of the matchmakers that bring it all together and help you with all the supply chain connections that you need to develop your projects and programs. We offer training and webinars and workshops. We've done first responder training and conferences. So there's a lot of resources and information that we can get out to you and share with you to help you. And we can help you with funding applications. If there is maybe DERA funding or something you want to apply for, we can help you with that. And occasionally we like to lead projects and want to develop our own and bring you all along with us. And we also have some public recognition programs through our Green Fleets program. And we also do an annual reporting process where we collect data and track progress on alternative fuel projects in the state of Louisiana. So there's lots of things that we can assist with. So enough about us. We want to move on to what you're here to talk about today. And I want to introduce your moderator today and our board president, Scott Barrios. He's the manager of business development of electric mobility at Keystring Labs at Entergy. So Scott.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. And at Entergy, we definitely appreciate the partnership with Louisiana Clean Fuels and Southeast Louisiana Clean Fuel Partnership. Fuel Partnership. I am honored today to make the introduction to this great line of speakers we have. Again, my name is Scott Barrios. I'm the manager of business development of electric mobility at Entergy. I'm part of our innovation group known as Keystring Labs. I also have the honor of being the president of the board of Louisiana Clean Fuels. And it's through those great partnerships that a lot of the people on this call, or panelists today, are working together to make sure we bring a great sustainable transportation industry in Louisiana as well too. I'm a native of Louisiana. I'm from Thibodaux originally, so I'm happy to keep that working going in Louisiana as well too. So if you're not familiar with Entergy, Entergy is a integrated utility company headquartered in New Orleans, powering 3 million customers in Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. We're committed to creating a cleaner, more resilient energy future, including increasingly carbon-free energy sources. With roots in the Gulf South region for more than a century, Entergy is a recognized leader in our corporate citizenship through our philanthropy and advanced advocacy efforts annually over the past several years. Our approximately 12,500 employees are dedicated to powering life today and for the future generations as well too. At Entergy, I lead the company's partnership and outreach efforts on our growing electric mobility portfolio. My role is to be a catalyst for change at the company. I'm looking at ways we can bring rapid change to the utility in this ever-evolving space in transportation and energy as well too. My main priority in the lab is to focus on the customers and develop new resources for them to address both resiliency and sustainability issues on the way they're going to receive power from us. So we see electric mobility or e-mobility as a top-line effort for the Entergy's overall electrification strategy, and more importantly, as a way to focus on the needs of our customers. We know it's going to drive significant change across the company, and our work streams are working to address some of these. We're looking at customer fleet solutions, enabling more public charging in our spaces, looking into load forecasts and the impacts of the grid for the future as well too, so we can better prepare ourselves and creating that resilient, sustainable infrastructure as well too. So we have some great projects in Louisiana. One I like to highlight is a partnership with the city of New Orleans that we'll be installing up to about 25 level 2 charging stations around the city in great partnership with the Mayor's Office of Transportation there. So we're hoping that that'll be coming out by the summer as well too there. Also have the honor of being the president of the board of this great nonprofit that is Louisiana Clean Fuels, which is a U.S. Department of Energy designated Clean Cities Coalition. So my role as the president of the board is to ensure that Ann, Tyler, and the rest of the staff have the resources that they need to be the glue that brings us all together in developing this planned strategy for the state. We view this partnership with Louisiana Clean Fuels as a great enabler to bring all these various stakeholders together. So not only do I wear my hat for Entergy and Louisiana Clean Fuels, I also drive an EV. I drive all around the state, put a lot of miles on my EV, going between all parts of the state, meeting with different entities, different stakeholders. So it gives me a deep appreciation for what we need to do as a state from an infrastructure perspective, both driving through the rural areas and the dense urban areas as well too. So bottom line, my goal is to enable equitable access to EV charging infrastructure throughout our communities. And I know the partnerships that Louisiana Clean Fuels and Southeast Louisiana Clean Fuels partnerships are enables all this to happen. So now I have the honor of introducing our first presenter. So on January 29th, 2016, Thomas Harris was appointed as the Louisiana Secretary of Natural Resources by Governor John Bel Edwards. Prior to being secretary, Mr. Harris served in the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality for nearly a decade. During his time there, he developed the state standards for the evaluations of regulated sites. Prior to being appointed as the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources, Secretary Harris was the administrator of the Technology Assessment Division for the Department of Natural Resources as well. He earned his BS in biochemistry from LSU and a Master's of Science in Public Health and Environmental Toxicology and Human Health Risk Assessment from Tulane University. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Secretary Harris. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Scott. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for inviting me here today. I'd like to share some ideas and update our progress on finding ways to better balance Louisiana's energy and economic needs with the needs of our environment to better manage and reduce emissions, particularly carbon dioxide. Finding alternative means of harnessing our traditional sources of fuel, and also developing alternative fuel sources to the point that they're market ready, available, and affordable is probably the great challenge of our generation and some of the most important work we can do for future generations as well. Now, there are two reasons for that. First of which is what we've been seeing the past few months since Russia invaded Ukraine. For all the effort and progress made in finding alternative energy sources, we see that oil and gas are still the lifeblood of the global economy, and that nothing out there is ready to take on the full load quite yet. If you need proof of that, look to what you paid for gasoline this time last year versus now. It paints a pretty compelling picture that we're too reliant on too few energy sources. Secondly, and more to the point of what we're here to talk about, is while there's still maybe those out there who argue about the fine points of human contribution to climate change, there's no question that managing carbon has become just a fact of doing business in a global economy. And that's not going to change in the immediate time frame. We simply have to find better ways to make use of our traditional fuels as we further develop our cleaner, renewable alternatives as a matter of environmental, energy, and economic security. For the most part, we at DNR, we deal with more of the raw materials for fuels, crude oil and natural gas. Though we have had a long-established partnership with Louisiana Clean Fuels in their efforts to promote wider accessibility and use of sustainable energy sources. However, in the past couple of years, we've been increasingly engaged in promoting perhaps one of the great clean fuel opportunities for our state and the nation, and that's the production and use of hydrogen as a readily available, clean burning and affordable source of energy. The concept of using hydrogen as a fuel source is certainly not new, but the level of interest and the potential for investment that we've seen recently seems to indicate that widespread use of hydrogen is closer to being part of being a reality than it's ever been. From new projects involving production of clean hydrogen to new commitments for investment from the federal government, We're seeing both the private sector and public policy working to make affordable, accessible hydrogen a real part of our future energy portfolio. One of the highest visibility examples of that is the federal government's commitment of $8 billion to fund at least 4 hydrogen hubs across the country through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021. For us, that seems to be an opportunity tailor-made for Louisiana, because we've been working toward making this state a hydrogen hub for some time. We just never knew to call it that. I guess a reasonable question one might ask at this point is, well, what exactly is a hydrogen hub? In short, it's a state or a region that combines capabilities to provide the raw materials from which to extract hydrogen, produce significant quantities of it, transport it, and make use of it as a manufacturing feedstock and fuel. On our own, Louisiana could argue right now that we're a burgeoning hub for hydrogen use. In fact, we already have a healthy infrastructure in place that's actively delivering the raw materials to our industrial base, which is in turn making use of that hydrogen feedstock. When it comes to extracting hydrogen, the 2 main places to get it from are methane reforming and from electrolysis of water. Of the 2, methane is the most widely used source for industrial needs, and Louisiana already has proven that we have an ample supply of natural gas. Currently, Louisiana supplies about 9% of the total marketed natural gas in the nation, and we're producing it at a rate not seen in our state since the late 1970s. We've produced more than 3 trillion cubic feet of gas in each of the past 3 years, and we're on pace for a 4th year. And those figures represent the low price market that preceded the recent upswing in energy prices. Our production nearly doubled between 2016 and 2021. If we're talking water as a source of our hydrogen, I don't have to tell you, we've always had plenty of that just about anywhere you go in Louisiana. It's just the technology to extract hydrogen from water is not quite as mature as the processes to get it from methane, and it's not yet at a scale to be produced at a competitive market price. When it comes to transporting hydrogen, Louisiana already has more than 50,000 miles worth of pipeline running through our state, coming in from the Gulf of Mexico and other states through our industrial and production areas and back out again. There are plenty of established right-of-ways and a baseline of pipeline infrastructure and expertise in our state that can serve as a backbone of transporting just about any gas or liquid you can think of. I noted that Louisiana already has an industrial appetite for hydrogen as a feedstock, but I think the argument can be made quite strongly that we also have great potential markets for use of hydrogen as a fuel. Likely targets for research and development are some of the heavier transportation modes, such as marine and river transport, working down over time to things such as long-haul trucking and agricultural machinery. All of these kinds of activities are already a significant part of Louisiana's economy and offer opportunities to broaden our sources of energy. And while we think Louisiana can make a strong case that we're already a hydrogen hub in the making on our own, it never hurts to have a few friends helping you out. To that end, we've joined forces with our sister states, Arkansas and Oklahoma, to make a combined effort in applying for part of that federal funding for hydrogen hubs. We call our regional group HALO, standing for hydrogen in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. As part of our discussions with our partners in Oklahoma and Arkansas, we found that, similar to here, there's a great appetite for expanding hydrogen's use as a fuel and a feedstock. So far, we've made our interest known to U.S. Department of Energy and made our pitch as to what a hydrogen hub program should broadly be when that time comes around for DOE to make its decision on who gets selected for funding from the infrastructure bill. Our view is that we should be working with partners in both research, such as our universities, and industry to promote investment in production and transportation of low carbon hydrogen. B, working to connect major high carbon facilities to hydrogen infrastructure for fuel blending or replacement to cut carbon emissions. And finally, finding ways to support all phases of the industry that can use hydrogen as a fuel source. We believe it takes all three to make the successful hub. Hopefully, Department of Energy will see it the same. One thing that's been very exciting to me is the level of interest we've received from industry on the concept of expanding clean hydrogen production and its expanded use as a fuel since the HALO partnership was announced just a couple of months ago. In our discussions with other state HALO partners, it's also become pretty clear that even if we were not to receive the federal funding, these clean hydrogen goals are still worth pursuing. We'll just need to be a little more creative about how we approach them. One of the more promising nearer term opportunities is producing hydrogen by combining extraction from methane with the use of carbon capture and storage processes. Of course, carbon capture also holds promise for making other fuels cleaner. Over the past several years, we've seen increased interest in the concept of carbon management with CCS. But in just the past year, we've really seen companies step up to make that potential of carbon management in this state into a reality. The carbon management movement and industry's increasing participation are indications that market forces and federal policies are driving the energy, manufacturing, and chemical industries to do something with waste carbon. And carbon management seems to have become an attractive growth industry for Louisiana. Louisiana is already home to one of the world's largest concentrations of industrial facilities, providing CO2 capture opportunities in close proximity to one another and located near deep, well-confined geologic storage options. With our existing industrial and pipeline expertise and infrastructure, Louisiana could position itself as a regional leader in CO2 pipeline networks and a destination point for carbon dioxide storage. From where Louisiana stands, with our strong background in drilling and injection technologies, as well as pipeline and petrochemical infrastructure, the idea of building up a new economic engine around carbon capture, use, and storage seems like a custom-built opportunity with immediately recognizable benefits for the state and the industries that do business here. And we've got an ample supply of facilities that could benefit from new carbon management processes. The refining and chemical industries have potential advantages for carbon capture deployment due to key existing industrial processes that produce relatively pure streams of CO2, low cost of capture, and sufficient industry scale and know-how. Our energy assets, infrastructure, and existing industry presence provide the conditions needed to commercially scale CCS in response to federal incentives and state policies that support carbon storage. In seeking to put policy into effect, our Office of Conservation is currently working to gain regulatory primacy from EPA over carbon storage through injection in Class 6 wells. Our application currently is being reviewed by EPA headquarters in DC after passing Region 6 review, putting Louisiana in line to become just the third state to gain Class 6 primary permitting and enforcement authority from EPA, and we expect that sometime later this year. Our goal is to get to the point that operators can go to the state for permitting instead of EPA. Compared to our federal partners, state agencies are better able to streamline processes and get those necessary permits turned around quickly, simply by the nature of our location, familiarity with local issues of geology, and focus on a much smaller area than an entire EPA region. So in Louisiana, we have the geology, we have the industry and infrastructure, and we have the rules and regulations in place. What we've been looking for now are the partnerships that make it all work, and the projects that become the first true steps towards both new opportunities and economic growth. And we've begun to see that happen. Just last fall, we approved the first two operating agreements to secure underground injection zones for projects that intend to set up carbon sequestration facilities. One is for the production of low carbon hydrogen from methane, and the other for sequestering waste carbon from biofuels production. Since then, we've been approached by a number of companies looking to do the same kind of CCS projects. And we've heard CCS project proposals involving LNG export sites, petrochemical facilities, and from facilities intended to be dedicated to providing commercial sequestration. While hydrogen and CCS are separate initiatives to some degree, they're both interrelated, and both will be an important part of a cleaner fuel future for our state. In closing, I want to thank you again for inviting me here today to speak with you. And I do look forward to discussions about how to best develop these growing industries so that they can deliver on their greater promise as a part of a balanced approach to supporting our needs for energy, a strong economy, and a sustainable environment. Thank you for your time and attention today. Thank you, Scott.
All right, thank you, Secretary Harris. Some great comments on why Louisiana is situated very uniquely to support the future fuel needs for the not only the state and the nation as well too. So thank you. Look forward to getting to some questions on your comments later on. So our next speaker, Governor John Bel Edwards, named Dr. Chuck Carr Brown the Secretary of Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality on January 11th, 2016. Secretary Brown's appointment was a homecoming as he previously worked at DEQ from 2004 to 2008, serving as the Assistant Secretary for Environmental Services. Prior to his appointment as Secretary, Dr. Brown was the President and CEO of Brown & Associates, LLC, a firm specializing in the delivery of environmental services, government relations, and issue management. He was also was previously the Vice President of Metro Services Group and President and Chief Operating Officer of Community Resource Services. Dr. Brown possesses a Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry from the University of Southern Mississippi. We won't hold that against him. And he holds a Master of Public Administration from Southern University, A&M College, and a Doctorate of Philosophy in Public Policy, Environmental Policy from the Nelson Mandela School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Southern University, A&M College in Baton Rouge. Secretary Brown, please, floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Scott and Ann, for inviting me. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're taking a lead as a state towards of course, a low carbon future. And you'll hear me amen a lot of things that Secretary Harris said and set the stage for some of the things that Secretary Wilson will say, because we are all integrated into that path forward. The next slide, please. So a few topics I'm going to talk about is, of course, our present situation, the people and the plan, some interim steps, some challenges. Can we get there? Because it is a question. And then some climate change actions we can take or have taken. Next slide. So in December of 2019, we met as a cabinet on a retreat, and we were talking about where we are as a state. Do we look at good government as we move forward, or do we look at policy issues coming out of Washington? And we chose good government as we move forward. So one of the presentations I made was, you know, whether you want to call it climate change or not, there's nobody out there that can deny that, you know, we have sea level rise, we have subsidence, more frequent storms, more intense storms, and something has to be done to deal with resiliency and to make sure that our contribution to what's being put in the atmosphere is managed. As you move forward to the next slide, Ann, you will see that in February of 2020, actually Governor Edwards created a Climate Initiative Task Force and charged that task force with creating a climate action plan. He involved lots of folks involved. That's where the people come in, where we had sector committees that deal with ag and conservation, land use, transportation. You had an advisory group that dealt with several areas, including equity. And then ultimately the task force that the three of us on this call today set on as we delivered a plan to the governor that got Louisiana to net zero by 2050. Next slide, please. So as we talk about that, I talked to my counterparts in Mississippi and Arkansas and Texas, and in certain places you can't even mention the word climate, period. And we're not going to be able to get there as a state without me engaging my regional partners. So there are several things that I will talk about a little bit later that I can actually find those folks in that extreme red state to our west that they were willing to do to actually contribute. Some interim steps that we can all take, or we all looking at, of course, is just integrating to cleaner burning fuels. One of the things I have highlighted is natural gas as a bridge fuel. In some states, when you say natural gas as a bridge fuel, is actually a dirty word. But you got to understand that natural gas is clean burning at the time. And in order to get to where we want to get to, we're going to have to use natural gas as that bridge fuel. We're going to have to also adopt wind and solar, and I'll talk about how they play a puzzle. But as you look at hydrogen is another piece. You heard the secretary talk about hydrogen as a transportation, integral part of transportation, not just EV, but actually hydrogen, especially on the equipment that's over the road haulers or ocean going vessels. Next slide, please. So challenges. One of the things that's come out of the Biden administration is they asked Louisiana to be in the position by 2030 to have 300,000 electric vehicles. Well, as we sit here today, there's approximately 3,000. And in order to have enough infrastructure to actually service 300,000 EVs, we got to have 4 level 2 chargers built per day starting a year and a half ago. That's a serious challenge. One of the things I mentioned about natural gas is you cannot expect to flip the switch off on Friday with fossil fuels and then flip it back on Saturday using renewables. Just not going to happen like that. Another challenge is we've got lots of folks in this country that's never bought a brand new vehicle. So they're certainly not going to make an EV their first new vehicle. So we got to have an aftermarket. We got to have batteries that are interchangeable. We can't have the iPhone battery, it won't fit in the Android phone. Those are all things that folks have to work on. And I know that they are. So those challenges are present. We know about them, and we certainly have to be able to address them in order for us to be successful. Next slide, please. So can we get there? Yes, we can. One of the things I mentioned but if I don't have a regional approach, then I can't get there. We can't do it alone. We have to improve mass transit options. I've had somebody come to me and they were trying to get from Monroe to Baton Rouge on a bus. And in order to do that, they had to go to Dallas, to Houston, then to Baton Rouge. And I'm like, really? It took these people 14 hours to get from Monroe to Baton Rouge on a bus. So that's telling me that there's something wrong with that equation, that there needs to be more options. Of course, high-speed rail is a no-brainer. Park and ride, being able to maximize, the high occupancy vehicle approach. All those things have to be integrated as we're going to move forward with our transportation options. There's absolutely no reason why I can't take a train or shouldn't be able to take a train in Baton Rouge and ride to New Orleans to catch a flight. Yeah, and of course I know that Secretary Wilson will talk about that. Next slide, please. So some climate change actions. We all know that, everything has to be a part of the puzzle. I have it here at the bottom, subdivision solar. I've pitched the idea to land developers that if I were you and I were building new subdivisions, that I would keep some lots vacant for my own self-contained power generation using solar panels. I do know that there's some innovative work going on now that are making solar panels look like actual windows in houses and buildings. I think that all of those will play an intricate part. But you also see here cleaner power sources. We talked about for energy. You heard the Secretary Harris talk about the heavy industry corridor that we have. Well, it's huge. Our pie chart nationally, the pie chart naturally, when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, is you look at transportation, electric generation, and industry all sit at 20 to 25%. In Louisiana, our pie chart is skewed. Electric generation is roughly 13 to 15%, because we only get about that much from cogeneration units. Transportation is less than 20%, but industry is 65%. So that means that I've got to take some measures to be able to reduce that particular piece of the chart down to at least the national average. The next chart, next slide, please. So I've been approached as a part of the climate action plan. I've been directed to basically set an industry standard to be able to place into permits as we issue them that's got a reduction component. A part of that component has got to be carbon capture and sequestration. Now, we know that there are folks out there that are unsure about the safety, but Louisiana has the geography. We have the ability. You heard Secretary Harris talk about the Class 6 primacy. I've heard that folks are actually looking at our application to copy it. You heard him talk about the hydrogen hub. Hydrogen has to be a component. He talked about hydrogen generation from methane, and that's called blue hydrogen. When you can actually change your fuel source, 15% of your fuel source can be blue hydrogen without changing any of your infrastructure. So industry has to have that. And I want to repeat that. 15% of your fuel source can be blue hydrogen without changing any infrastructure. So it's an easy adaptation. He talked about green hydrogen, that's from electrolysis, and that's also being studied heavily here. So I am looking to set that standard that'll be issued into permits. And then financial incentives. So this is where my counterparts in Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas come in. So we all know that there's a Q45 tax credit on the tonnage of carbon that's captured and sequestered. There's discussions about the price of that ton, of course, going up. And I think it's $51 a ton. And most folks are saying that number has to be 85 in order for it to be attractive to industry. Well, everybody, believe it or not, in Texas and all these other states nearby us are all for that, and they would sign on to that. But this is a step further that I'd like to take, and that is on the front end. I've actually entered into some discussions with our Department of Revenue, and I mentioned it to the governor that we may want to look at some tax code changes that allows a tax deduction on monies that's invested on the front end. And so I actually asked my counterparts in Texas, if something like that were brought forth, would their governor and their congressional delegation support it? And he all but said yes, but of course he had to check with the powers to be. But those are the kind of things that we can do to make a serious dent in our greenhouse gas numbers and how we actually get to net zero by 2050. And the financial incentives can be offered that doesn't put Louisiana on an unlevel playing field financially. So those are some things that are coming in from LDEQ in conjunction with our sister agencies such as DNR and Department of Transportation. And the final thing I'll say is, we all sit on various boards. I sit on the Keystone Energy Board. I'm also one of the officers at Environmental Council of the States. And the Secretary at DNR and I are engaged with the National Renewable Energy Lab and looking to have them help us craft a plan that will actually move Louisiana further up in the pecking order when it comes to awarding one of those 4 hydrogen hubs. So lots of things going on. We are engaged with offshore wind. We are also looking at ways to look at hydroelectric and of course the ultimate just reduction of the use of natural gas as we progress and using that as a fuel source. So here's my contact info, and I'll turn it back to you, Scott, and then await any questions and answers.
Dr. Brown, thank you so much. Great information, especially what the state's doing with the Governor's Climate Initiative Task Force and how this is all tying together. Now, I think our last presenter, based on the comments that Secretary Harris gave, that Secretary Brown gave, looking at energy, how it affects the environment, I think Secretary Wilson is going to bring us home here, how this all ties into transportation. So Dr. Shawn Wilson was appointed as the Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development, DOTD, by Governor John Bel Edwards in January of 2016, is now serving as a secretary for a second term. He has more than 15 years of executive service at DOTD. During his tenure as secretary, DOTD has awarded more than $4.6 billion in construction projects. Dr. Wilson is the vice chair of the Transportation Research Board Executive Committee and is the president of AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. Dr. Wilson earned his BA in urban and regional planning from the University of Louisiana and holds a Master's of Public Administration degree as well as a PhD in public policy, also from the Nelson Mandela School of Public Policy at Southern University. Secretary Wilson, please, sir. Let's hear what you have to say about what DOTD is doing here.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you for inviting me, and it's an honor to be on this panel with 2 fellow cabinet members, both Tom and Dr. Brown, one of which I was in school with. It's always an honor to visit with these people, and it's just the highest honor for me to have worked in this very capable and talented administration. So, I think most of what you've heard today really speak to commitment and competence on these issues. And this actually starts with the leadership that we have in Governor John Bel Edwards. Before I get into the Climate Action Plan and some of the other things that we're doing here at DOT, I think it's important to go back to 2016 when we rolled out in partnership and in collaboration with Dr. Brown's agency, our alternative fuels corridor. We have structured ourselves and continued to deliver transportation, I think, in a way that sets us up for the future. And after this last session, not just here at the state level, but also at the congressional level, we're actually turning the corner. We're seeing a new trajectory for where we intend to take transportation. And its underpinning is really based in an appreciation of science and data as it relates to climate and climate action and what that means for the future of Louisiana. More importantly, I think it also speaks to the economics of what this will mean for Louisiana. DNR has talked about the importance of hydrogen and what these economic impacts can be. And then Dr. Brown also talked about the responsible rollout of how we implement and change some of our policies. So dating back to 2016, when we moved into this alternative fuels corridor, we saw the idea of not just gas stations as a non-renewable source, if you will, that will drive energy and mobility in our state. From a transportation perspective, we still have some work to do because our funding for our infrastructure is really based on that natural resource and how it is collected, distributed, and taxed in the state. But we had the vision back then to say there's more to this. We cannot put all of our eggs in one basket. And that type of balance, I think, speaks to a real evolving environment for our state. So what are we doing here at DOT to be able to embrace that? And I'm going to run over a couple of things and then look forward to having some Q&A and discussion so that we can best use the time of the 50 plus people that are participating today, in addition to our panelists. So first and foremost, I can think about some of the big wins that we've had in Louisiana from DOTD that talks about our successes and future plans even. And the first is really how we help transform the fleet of both transit and industrial or commercial vehicles. I can think back to when we worked with the Shreveport Transit Authority to be able to convert their last remaining buses to CNG and or electrical buses. That's going to allow them to have a cleaner, more affordable, more efficient system in operation. And those investments actually got the ball rolling and created them to be in a unique space. And here within DOT, we have long-term strategies and plans to convert not just our existing vehicle fleet, but our equipment as well, whether it's light or heavy industrial equipment, to be able to convert them to alternative fuels and or hybrid modeled vehicles and equipment so that we can best leverage the technologies of an evolving future. We also think about what we do here at DOTD in terms of research and what that might mean for how we build our systems. So when you think about low carbon concrete, when you think about cleaner systems for painting and maintenance of our highways and our infrastructure components, when you think about how we can find alternative fuels as it relates to our multimodal transportation system, we're looking at the research and applying it here in Louisiana. I think about how we're dealing with new ferries and what's happening over in Cameron Parish and what we're hoping to do for other ferry services here in the state when we build a cleaner, more fuel efficient transportation system. I also think about how we are advancing very basic practices and principles of transportation and mobility to help address this in a comprehensive way. I look at the HOV process that we have going. We've got one HOV system here in the state. It dates back to the beginning of the reconstruction or new construction of a new bridge down in New Orleans. We're actually rolling out and developing a second HOV model here in Louisiana along I-12. That's going to complement the I-10 project that is actually widening the interstate through I-10, but it's going to allow us to have more throughput, less emissions, less congestion, and really be a congestion mitigation solution. And then Dr. Brown talked about the really big win that we would have, and that has to do with passenger rail and looking at train service as a way to move people more efficiently and more affordably, and in many respects, much more safely than perhaps putting them in a car. While we are swinging for the fence, there is some tall orders to be able to make this happen, but we have funding for the first time to help jumpstart this service. And I say jumpstart this service because without this initial investment, you won't be able to really grow a service. And I tell all of our constituents and stakeholders, no city that has a major transit structure started off in its most robust nature. It started off much smaller. And so we're looking to do that between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, where we connect those super regions via a set of rails. And then we're going to see how we can grow the economy based on that affordable and accessible mobility solution. We're also pitching this on North Louisiana as well to help introduce long distance service to connect Atlanta to Dallas via Meridian, Mississippi to Longview, Texas, along that rail service on I-20. That too, I think, is going to be extremely helpful in terms of changing the mindset and integrating that into our daily routines of how we move and what we do. And then last but not least, when I think about the EV systems that are available in the discretionary opportunities, we are so excited that this bipartisan infrastructure law that actually created about $6 billion of direct investment in Louisiana's infrastructure over the next 5.5 years has been signed into law. It enjoyed the support of both Congressman Troy Carter and Senator Bill Cassidy. That's such a transformative piece of legislation for us. And while it is transformative, it's transformative with a lowercase t and not a capitalized T, because it's providing sustainable revenue to us to be able to make the kinds of investments that will jumpstart this entire industry of not just electric vehicles, but alternative fuel vehicles, so that the private sector can then leverage those resources and that citizens could actually more affordably embrace this technology. We see the onset of this coming from the conversion of the fleet. When you think about the Amazons of the world, and you think about transit systems of the world, when you think about creating bus rapid transit here in the North Baton Rouge area with clean fuel systems, that's going to really help, particularly in communities that might not have been invested on a regular basis or might not have been as engaged on these issues of climate, but there are real impacts as a result of this work. So with this EV system that we're going to roll out, we're going to be spending $70+ million over the next 5 years. And Louisiana Clean Fuels is working very closely with the Department of Transportation. And we are currently out on public comment for our EV plan. And so we would encourage you to take a look at that and see what it's going to do for our state so that we can submit our plan in August and then start to make awards early next year in the first and second quarter to start that solicitation process. That's so important because that's going to be really the basic elements of what this alternative fuel system is going to look like. We have indicated, or you'll see in that plan, that our entire interstate system, as well as a couple of other critical corridors, are the beginnings of what we will have here in Louisiana. And it's going to follow traffic, it's going to follow existing infrastructure, and of course, it'll follow those national standards of what their placements are going to be. It will also adhere to the Justice 40 initiative and embrace the same commitment for DBE participation and engagement as we have here in the department on the larger front. So I am super excited to see where we're going here in the state, but I'm even more excited on this last piece because the collaboration that we have both with the public and the private sector, as well as the elected leadership, finally making sustainable investments here in Louisiana so that we can make the type of physical infrastructure improvements that are necessary across the state of Louisiana, whether they're with bridges or interstates or highways or rural roads. If we don't take care of those pieces of infrastructure, no matter what fuel source your vehicle or selected transportation alternative will run on, you will have challenges and difficulties. And so you've got to have a balanced equation. On one half, you've got to have the vehicles moving, taking advantage of those renewables and the innovations of technology and designs and electrification. And then you have to have a system in place that keeps up with that technology in terms of the pavements, in terms of the signs, in terms of the lighting, in terms of the technology. So we actually have the best of both worlds. We've got some of the best ideas. We've certainly got the most hardworking people, and we now have the resources to deliver this. And I will start where I will finish where I started, which is with collaboration and competence. They will absolutely make the difference as we embrace these new technologies and deliver that for the state of Louisiana. And so, Scott, I appreciate the opportunity to share a few words with you and your listeners, the participants, and look forward to the interesting Q&A.
Secretary Wilson, thank you so much. Great comments. Really excited to hear a lot of great points you made. You know, I love the fact that the state is leading the looking at alternative fuels for its own fleet. The state of Louisiana has one of the largest operating fleets, if not the largest in the entire state. We saw pictures from Secretary Brown too in his presentation with the electric vehicle that they have. And, you know, we've been working closely with their office as well too through Louisiana Clean Fuels on looking at ways we can, lower the emissions of the fleet as well too. So I give kudos to the entire state for taking a leadership position there too. You also mentioned the draft state national electric vehicle infrastructure plan as well too. Tyler did put a link to that in the chat. So those who are in attendance who haven't seen that yet, like the secretary said, I do invite you to take a look at it. It's a great plan that the state DOTD has developed, and it's open for comment. So I know there's a few folks in attendance as well too who are involved deeply with that planning. So they really want to hear your comments. We're all looking forward to implementing that plan together as a state, because it's going to take all the folks on this call in attendance and others to make this happen. So we'll move into the Q&A session now. So if you have questions, please, at the center of the Zoom call on the bottom, you'll see a Q&A function. Please drop any questions in there. We have one already in there, and we want to make sure we can keep this rolling. So to lead it off here, one question I have, and it kind of goes into the question Nicholas Greenwald asked as well too. The question he asked in the chat is, any information on other clean fuels such as propane? As stated, with the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, it is a low carbon emission alternative fuel. It seems like the focus primarily of this discussion has been electric and hydrogen. So I know the state's involved in a lot of other alternative fuels, propane, CNG. There's some great use cases around the state for this. So I'll open it up to anyone. Anyone lead in with looking at propane and other alternative fuels outside of hydrogen and electric on some great use cases and some strategy going forward.
I'll take a stab at it.
Go ahead, Tom.
Secretary Harris, please. Yep.
Yeah, propane is a component of natural gas. I mean, natural gas is basically methane, ethane, and propane, and basically that order of concentration. Any of them, when burned in the presence of oxygen, is going to release CO2. The primary advantage of hydrogen as a fuel source over any of those is that when you burn hydrogen in the presence of oxygen, you get water and heat, of course. Yeah, I mean, propane has its place, and it probably always will, but what we're trying to do is decrease CO2 emissions and ways to accomplish that. And I'm not sure propane will really fit that profile. Dr. Wilson, any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I'll let Tom tell you what's in fuel or in gas, because I just tell you how much it is per gallon and put it in my car. He's the scientist in this bunch, he and Dr. Brown. What I will tell you is I think it's got to be kind of a comprehensive, all of the above alternative, because there may be some places where that is absolutely going to be essential, affordable, and practical. I will also tell you, I had the opportunity to drive in one of the hydrogen fueled diesel or hydrogen fuel semi trucks out in California or in Seattle, Washington. And it was the most pleasant experience I've ever had in terms of the quiet, in terms of the energy efficiency, in terms of the strength and power that it produces. And it really did present a very hopeful idea for me in terms of what's happening at our ports and how they're moving containers and what that can do for the environment, or those areas in and around the ports, particularly in communities that might be low income or Black and brown distressed communities. From an environmental standpoint, what that type of technology will give them: quiet, safe, clean alternatives compared to what we currently see. And so that's an application or an approach where it may not happen as quickly in the mainstream market, but there's some real pockets, particularly with fleets, where we can really make a difference. And that's where all of those alternatives will make sense and add value to that particular mode. For Louisiana DOT, we are clearly interested in hybrid vehicles, particularly because of how we respond to disasters and emergencies and what that may need to be. And so I think it's got to be an all of the above alternative or solution in terms of what those energy sources are.
Yeah, and let me chime in just quickly. I do agree. I certainly understand what Secretary Harris was saying, but ultimately, when we petitioned the Federal Highway Administration for that alternative fuel corridor designation, and that means all of our interstate systems, I-20 east and west, I-49 north and south, I-10 east and west, those little blue signs tell you what you can get and where you can get it. And propane is a part of that mixture. My ultimate vision is to be able to drive into a Love truck stop or a racetrack and pick your fuel. And that's sort of how it should be, especially moving forward. And Scott, I really appreciate you bringing up that Chevy Bolt that I have in our fleet, first fully electric vehicle in a state fleet. We also put charging stations in the state garages. And through the Volkswagen settlement, we've actually put 94 charging stations throughout the state. And as a part of Electrify America, those are fast chargers throughout the state also. So it's just a matter now of being able to change folks' mindset. It's a transition. I've got folks on my staff, when they go out to buy a new vehicle, I was like, why aren't you looking at an electric vehicle? And it just doesn't sink in. And I will tell you that, Sean, I'm looking at the electric Hummer. It's just going to take me a year and a half to get it.
Well, if I could buy that Rivian tomorrow and get it, I would too. And look, you made a very positive statement there, Chuck, about the intentionality of what this is. And so this, if we just allow folks to operate business as usual, we'll never be seeing this conversion. It's going to take leadership like what you've provided, and Tom, and quite frankly, this administration, to say we will do this and make those commitments. Otherwise, we'll talk about it, because this isn't the first opportunity that the states had to really do these conversions. We attempted some of this during the Romer years, if I'm not mistaken, and we did not fully follow through. Now you've got the original equipment manufacturers out there saying by 2030, 2035, that's all they're going to be producing. We've got the electric utility providers energized, pun intended, to be able to do this. And now we've got the federal government giving us resources to roll this out, pun intended. We're going to roll it out. So this is just really an interesting dynamic moment for us. It's an inflection point in how we move and how we energize our system.
Great comments all around. And I know Secretary Wilson, we did discuss that Rivian in the past, and I know you got a chance to test drive that again. They're here on the road in Louisiana. I have a couple friends that have them. So we actually had one at DOTD a few weeks ago too in front, when we're kind of doing a site visit with some of your staff there. So it has been on the grounds even of your headquarters building there too.
Well, it doesn't sit in that secretary's parking spot though. So if you can make that happen, it's going to be great. And look, I'm also interested, and this is for another discussion, is what that secondary resale market is going to look like for this industry. Because when you really get into that space, then I think you're going to see the numbers really exponentially increase for the average consumer to be able to afford this.
And that's absolutely true. That equitable access to the vehicle market, we're going to see that level out in the next. And this, the car market right now in general, is the craziest it's ever been in the history. It just doesn't make any sense to the way that we traditionally function. Having to trying to buy a vehicle for my daughter right now, having experience in that firsthand. It's an interesting car market for selling and buying a new and used vehicle. And you have your hand raised. I feel like you want to comment, and I'll turn comment.
Yes, just kind of going back to the propane comment and question that they had. The state has funded over 100 propane school buses under the Volkswagen settlement. And, sometimes when you're looking at your goals for your fleet and what you want to accomplish, sometimes it's total cost of ownership. Sometimes it's you want to reduce NOx. And so propane is good at reducing NOx. And we used to have a NOx problem in our state, and we've gotten a lot better at that. So there is, all of these different fuels are just different tools for different jobs. And you just got to find the one that works best for what outcome you're looking for.
Yeah, great comment. And yeah, there's different fuel uses for us and all around. We see a lot of propane being used, and UPS is a big user of propane fuel as well too, and those last mile delivery solutions. And they're looking, same thing, as a diversified fuel source for their fleet, which is again a very large fleet on the road. A lot of times looking at diversification of that fleet, the fuel source over the next several years as well too. One common theme I heard through the entire conversation is public-private partnerships, enabling this. I've heard Secretary Harris talked about the importance of industry and the hydrogen hubs. And that's due to where we're sitting with our unique geographic situation as well too, and also other partnerships with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab at U.S. Department of Energy, I heard discussed as well too. If there's any other partnerships, as we know partnerships are going to make this happen, what other partnerships should we be focused on as a state to kind of leverage some of these infrastructure funds? Any other ideas to make this happen? I'm just throwing it out there again, open it up to everyone as well too, and then have another question we'll come back to afterwards.
So Scott, I will tell you, and if you look at our plan and what we're attempting to do, because we're a government, we're not designed to grow, nor is there political appetite to grow who we are and what we are. And so clearly our partnerships are going to have to be with utility providers to a whole different new level. It's also going to have to engage with the private sector from a convenience store and a land perspective. I think there's this whole element of what happens in the construction for vertical construction in terms of how they're starting to plan and design to be able to provide the loads necessary and the space necessary for ownership to exist in either high-rise condos or in the homes. Well, much like what we see right now, that you won't build a new home without a fiber optic line compared to needing just a telephone line to get internet. So there's a long lead time to be able to integrate the type of infrastructure so it can be personalized to individuals and families. And so I think those are going to be some key strategic partnerships that from an agency perspective, we might not have dealt in this realm before, because we've dealt with C-stores and gas stations from an access standpoint, but not necessarily from this providing of a resource standpoint. So that's just one example of how our relationship might exist, but it will be refocused. Same thing with Entergy and other utility companies in terms of what that infrastructure looks like and the footprint they physically have. That's a little different in terms of what this is, a different type of footprint that we're going to be needing to work through with them. And so those are all going to be strategic partnerships for us.
Yeah, and I'd like to say we certainly need to make sure we continue to engage the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management when it comes to offshore wind. That's going to be key. What I find interesting is, of course, they're in international waters, but we've got folks coming to us telling us that, and Tom can try to talk to this, that within 3 miles, we could do everything, within the waters of the state. So that's a debate on whether or not that can actually happen. But wind power, I think Louisiana is poised, not only from infrastructure and old platforms, but from a workforce that's used to working in those conditions. And when speaking of workforce, I think the 3 of us are actually going to be meeting with the workforce secretary and talking about ways we can grow the folks that actually work on EVs, the folks that are actually in the renewable energy market, just growing a workforce. So Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, I think, is another strategic partnership that we need to make sure flourishes.
And Secretary Harris, would love to hear more from your perspective on that kind of offshore wind production and how that fits in. If you have any insights on that as well too, and any insights on strategic partnerships as well too.
Yeah, I'd be glad to, Scott. Thank you. Louisiana has what I'd classify as good wind resources near our coast. I mean, it's not like some parts of the country, like onshore West Texas and in Oklahoma, where they have great wind resources, or the Block Island project up on the East Coast. They have great wind resources there. We have good wind resources. And right now we're at the point where it's right where it makes economic sense, short of additional incentives or other financial incentives. The cost is right where, what it's going to cost to build the platforms, transport the energy to the grid through submerged cables. What I see is we're seeing a doubling of the amount of megawatts per turbine, about every year and a half to 2 years. So, I think we're coming right into that sweet spot where it's going to make sense for Louisiana nearshore and, federal offshore Louisiana very soon. It's happening very fast. The cost of the turbines is coming down, and the amount of electricity generated per turbine is increasing. Kind of like what we're seeing with hydrogen, honestly. Green hydrogen is, like I said, not quite there today, but you got to realize that we've gone over the last year and a half from the electrodes to make green hydrogen being made at garage scale. Now they're being made by a dozen guys in a rented commercial space, but you still don't see the investment from the national corporations with all the research dollars they have to bring to bear. And then most importantly, I believe, is commercialization, using economies of scale to drive the cost down where it is competitive. I expect that for, wind within very soon. Hydrogen may be a little further off. We may be 5 years away from reaching that economy of scale and affordability.
No, thanks, Secretary Harris. And from the utility perspective, to kind of answer the question that was answered in the chat too, Mike, on how this all fits together. A lot of utilities are looking at decarbonizing their own generation portfolios as well too. We are just again where we sit in that Louisiana with the abundance of natural gas. It's very easy for us to tap into natural gas, but there's ways to at least use it a little better through combined cycle natural gas turbines at generation plants, and also looking at bringing on more solar, wind online as well too over time, to diversify our fuel source as well. We know that's going to be important. Also looking at hydrogen hubs as well too, how that fits into it from a utility standpoint, because there's certain ways you can use hydrogen combined with natural gas for production of electricity in a combined cycle natural gas turbine. To kind of go with the last kind of one of the comments too, and Ann kind of mentioned this earlier in one of the opening sessions, when we look at the alternative fuel corridors that Secretary Wilson was talking about earlier, that work really beginning in 2016, and the last round being submitted recently in support of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. Something that's important to all of us here in Louisiana is support to hurricane evacuations. So, looking at the storm seasons that we had in Laura and Delta, Zeta 2020, Ida in 2021, we know that the frequency of storms is going to increase and they're going to be more abundant. So from your perspective, looking at the way we roll out alternative fuels, Dr. Brown mentioned they're all going to be available at a gas station. How does this go into state resiliency planning for support to evacuations, response, whether it's the state fleets even looking at that response, or getting people out and evacuating, getting them back in safely? I'll just open that up to comment. Actually, Sean, Dr. Wilson, I'll start off with you because I know you have this is part of your plan here.
Yeah, so our alternative fuels corridor is something that's going to evolve over time. And so clearly we're concentrating on US 90, all of our interstates, and then we will further roll that out with disaster response in mind. And so clearly that's going to be a big part of it. I also think that if you remember, we're instigating a process that's going to meet a national model and then filter out more into communities in a way that locals will have plans, rural communities will have plans. And so we're going to continue to add on just like we did to the interstate system. We're also including all of the loops and spurs off of that major interstate network to make sure that we get a maximum number of charging facilities out there. And then I think one of the things I'm going to challenge our folks to do is to roll these out with an idea of expansion. While we don't necessarily need a charging facility on every corner like you might have a gas station, if you have fueling stations where you have these sporadically spread out, that will contribute to making sure you have this network. The other piece I think you have to think about in terms of disaster response is, and we saw this with the electric buses, and what those buses can be converted to providing other sources of energy and charging facilities and power sources. We just going to have to be real thoughtful and strategic about that, where you have these large fleets with these massive battery systems that can operate a number of facilities and our other charging facilities in the interim to do it. That kind of speaks to why the hybrid model is much more attractive for me, so that we can have that continuity of service in those difficult times. And it's going to require more information for individuals who may need to be evacuated or moved forward. So I would say to the community and to this audience, look for these alternative fuel corridors to expand over time as we're able to augment that network and grow that network of fueling options.
Any other comments on that?
Yeah, it's hurricane response, disaster response. Believe me, the three of us have an integrated role. Of course, Dr. Wilson being the one out front, but alternative, we get fuel waivers when refineries can't produce fuel right now. We'll bring it in from Texas. The issue is these gas stations that went down without power. Same thing can happen with alternative fuels. So you have to look at ways to either be able to send power both ways. Just as Dr. Wilson mentioned, you've got a bus. It may be a hybrid. Either way, you may need to be able to push power to actually run a station, or you might have to have solar backup at a charging station. I think it's not all worked out, but all of those questions have to be answered, because say if we were, I guess I'll use a Tesla example, they were evacuating Florida, and my understanding is you could actually have extended life batteries or batteries that need to be charged more often. And Tesla had the ability to give everyone that long charge capability just by programming it into their vehicle. Those are the kinds of things that need to happen when it comes to this infrastructure that we put in place. This infrastructure has to have a backup system that's not dependent on fossil fuel and or a connected wire. And that's how I sort of see the process going forward, being able to continue to provide even when there's no known electricity source.
Secretary Harris, any comments?
No, I think Dr. Brown was spot on.
Thank you. Anna, I see you have your hand raised. Another comment, please.
Yeah, this just gives me a great opening to pitch our Building a Resilient Transportation System session tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So if you're not registered for that one, we can drop that link in the chat.
No, thank you, Ann, for the prompt. I know we have another great roundup of sessions tomorrow. A lot of this is going to fit in, kind of frame some of that as well, too. I know we have about 10 minutes left. I don't see any other questions, but one of the other questions I have, it came up, I believe Secretary Brown or Secretary Wilson mentioned it, the President's Justice 40 initiative, right? Looking at ensuring equitable access to these projects, looking at how the environmental justice effects are overburdened communities as well, too. Just to kind of frame, looking at the plans we talked about, whether it's NEVI, hydrogen hub, air quality, we've briefly discussed it, but I'd like to hear more about plans to incorporate Justice 40 as well, too, and learn more about your thoughts on how we ensure our overburdened communities get equitable access to some of these funds coming out. Secretary Harris, if that's okay, can we start with you there?
Absolutely. We've had a number of conversations with different parts of the federal government regarding, hydrogen, Class 6, the status of our Class 6 injection, well, primacy, and just hydrogen in general and energy in general. And there's been a consistency from the federal administration that environmental justice absolutely has to be part of permitting moving forward. And I think we all agree on that. You know, we always need to do more and look for ways to be more innovative in incorporating that evaluation into our permitting process and make sure that equity is part of the process. I still have some questions on what exactly I want to make sure that what we're planning to do is consistent with what EPA is looking for. I've had a number of conversations with Dr. Brown on the subject, and I think we're in the same place. We want to do it, we need to do it, but we just want to make sure we do it correctly. Dr. Brown, any thoughts you have?
Well, of course, I've been immersed in all of the equity conversations coming out of Washington, and it's EPA, it's Department of Energy, it's Department of Transportation, it's the whole of government approach. And a lot of folks are looking at EPA because they've got 30 years of experience, even though it's not necessarily always been experience that has become a reality. But I have an equity advisory group that kind of talks into both of my ears and says, okay, well, how is that permit going to impact the surrounding community? The whole Justice 40 initiative, where it's 40% of the business has to go into a minority company, or whether or not 40% of the benefits has to be realized by a disadvantaged community. What's the definition of a disadvantaged community? What tools does the federal government provide to us to help us guide? But it's always been in the forefront of my thought process. And we're trying to make sure that we approach everything from an equitable standpoint. And that was one of the questions I brought up earlier. And there are lots of folks that's never bought a brand new car. So they're not going to buy an electric vehicle as their first car, but there has to be an aftermarket. There has to be interchangeable batteries. So it can't be something that puts some segment of society at a disadvantage when it comes to this migration to an alternative future when it comes to transportation. So yes, we're aware of it. We're all trying to maneuver through the process, but it's always in the forefront of our thoughts.
And Secretary Wilson, to close us out.
Yeah, so the one thing I would say to you is, from our perspective, remember Justice 40 is not necessarily going to be the same in every agency. And so what may work for EPA might be a little different in terms of its implementation at DOT. And so we are clear that 40% of the overall benefits of all of these investments are going to go to communities that have been overburdened or impacted or disproportionately represented in some negative statistics based on that type of work or that particular subject matter. And so I think about the importance of making sure that there's a percentage of this work that's going to not just go in terms of what they do, but how they do it and who they do it with. And so we have been very intentional here at DOT of increasing the DBE participation such that there is a presence and an involvement. We're up to 16.4%, having achieved our actual goal of 14.8% last year. And so as we roll out these dollars, we have to think about that it's going to open up a whole new realm of opportunities. And so when you mentioned that question, Scott, about partnerships, we have to think about who we can partner with at community colleges and technical schools, as well as universities, and those types of businesses and associations that reflect the population that Justice 40 initiatives attempt to serve. And if we can do that, and from a collaborative way, if we can do that, we can plug in those different communities in all of these different offices, whether it's Interior, whether it's EPA, whether it's EQ, whether it's DOT, wherever we might want to find it. we can create that presence and not just think about, we want to serve those communities. We want those communities to be a part of the solution as well in helping deliver that service. And so it's got to be a both and opportunity for us. And we're going to challenge all of the sector that looks to participate in our grant program to lean forward in that space so that we can deliver on these initiatives, not just because President Biden talked about them, but because that's how you really grow and leverage the economy and the impact of what these resources can deliver.
Absolutely, Secretary Wilson. So yeah, definitely that's the great way to close it out, is we need community involvement. We need to engage our communities and hear their voice on what works for them as well too. So thank you so much. I know we have about 3 minutes left. So I do want to thank Secretary Wilson, Secretary Brown, and Secretary Harris for the opportunity to guide this conversation, and it's great presentations all around. I know a lot of our stakeholders really appreciate your time and your leadership in this realm as well too. There's a lot of links that got dropped in the chat on different Justice 40 initiatives. So please, everyone take a look at those as well too. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ann. Thank you so much, Ann.
Thank you so much. There's some great conversations here today. I'm very glad we're recording this, and we will be posting it on our YouTube channel. So if you came in late, you missed it, or you want to share it with some of your associates, we will be posting all the videos from our Clean Fuels Summit on our Louisiana Clean Fuels YouTube channel, and the link is right there. And just to remind you all of the sessions tomorrow, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., we have a session, Funding Your Clean Fuels Projects. We'll be talking about all the great grant opportunities that we have going on right now, and some tips on partnering and how to get those applications out and who to partner with. So that'll be tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Again, go to our website and you can get all the links there. Then at 12:30, we have Clean Transportation Solutions for Ports. This session is not just for ports, it's for anyone who is interested in some of these great opportunities that are going on. And we have a new speaker added to this panel, Mary Till with CellWatch. We'll be talking about utilizing your data and your telematics to be able to make great informed decisions on your clean transportation projects, and figuring out what's going to work for you and sustain and such. And then finally, to wrap up the virtual Clean Fuels Summit, we'll be building a resilient transportation system at 3 p.m. And we have Terry Chambers will be moderating that panel. So thank you all so much. We were really happy to have you all here today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session. And this concludes our webinar. Thank you.